Hey, ever wonder how to get your robot to go a specific distance? That's what we're going to learn today. It's time for class. All right, so here we are inside of the Spike Prime app. So what you're going to do first is you're going to go to New Project, and we're going to use something called word blocks. Once you get into more advanced programming, you can go into the Python. Personally, I prefer the word blocks. They can do just about anything that I want them to do. So we're going to go into word blocks. We're going to click Create. The next thing you need to do is you're going to need to connect your robot. So the way that we do that, you click on Connect. You're going to hold down this Bluetooth button here on the robot. So let me turn it on real quick. And then I'm going to hold down this Bluetooth button. Now that you hear that beep, that means that it's ready to pair. And so you'll just go ahead and click on the pair button. Once it pops up on here. When we create this program, the first thing we need to do is something called setup blocks. The setup blocks essentially teach the robot what it can do. Robots are incredibly stupid. The reason why I say that is because a robot will do whatever you tell it to do exactly as you tell it to do it. So if you tell the robot to drive forward and it's going to drive off of a cliff, it's going to drive off of the cliff because the robot does not know any better. It can't think, it can't reason. So what we need to do is do something called setup blocks, which teach the robot a little bit about itself before we get to programming. So the way we do that, we're going to start off over here in the movement section, and we're going to say set movement motors to, we use, like I said earlier in the last video, if you watched my video on how to build Spiky, I connect the motors to C and D, and I always do that. So C and D is where we're going to connect it to, and we're going to set our movement speed to 50%. I like setting it at 50% because if I go too quickly, sometimes it has a tendency to jump or to peel out or skid, and I don't like that. So I usually set it to 50%. Now, you'll notice this one here says set one motor rotation to 17.5 centimeters. What that means is in a perfect world, 17.5 centimeters would be your magic number. But in this case, we're not sure what that is, so we're going to figure out what that number should be for this specific robot. And it will probably be different for every single robot. So I'm going to leave that block off, and instead, I'm going to tell it to move forward for 5, and I'm going to click this little drop down arrow and say rotations. By having it move forward for 5 rotations, that's going to give me an average distance that it travels instead of an exact distance for one rotation. That helps me to compensate in case the robot skids or doesn't come to a complete stop very quickly. And then I add a stop moving block at the end. I don't need to add a stop moving block at the end, but I like to put the stop moving block in because it is a good practice to stop the robot from doing anything else after it does those 5 rotations. Now that we've got this program created, we're going to go ahead and send this over to the robot and see what it does. All right, so now that we've got our program set up and created, and we've got our program set for our robot to go forward 5 rotations, I'm going to set it on the line, and I set it so that the front of the robot is exactly on the edge of that line, just like that. That gives me a good solid starting point. And then I set up my ruler next to it so that I always know exactly how far it's going. And now we're going to send Spiky on his way, and we'll see how far he travels. Now, it may be different for each robot, and that's why we're doing this test in the first place. So if I look and measure how far he traveled, this particular Spiky, which might not be the same as yours, traveled 87 centimeters. So now all I've got to do is take 87, divide it by 5, and that tells me how far my robot travels in one rotation. Okay, so I ran that same program 5 separate times so I could get a good set of numbers, and I came out to an average of 87 centimeters every time. So if I take 87 centimeters and I divide that by 5 rotations, I get 17.4 centimeters. Now all I have to do is measure any distance I want the robot to go, divide it by this number, and that tells me exactly how many rotations that it needs to go. So as you can see, I've got these 2 tape lines set up. I don't have any idea how far apart they are, so I'm going to measure it. I'm going to cheat by using a tape measure. Then I take my measurement, divide it by that magic number that we found, and theoretically, Spiky should go exactly from one tape line to the other first try. We'll try it out. So when I measured, I got 171 centimeters. So I take that 171 centimeters and I divide it by our magic number, which was 17.4, and I get 9.83 rotations. Let's plug it into the robot, see what happens. So now that we know exactly what our magic number should be, we're going to go ahead and plug that number in. So like I was saying before, you can take this block here and add it as one of your setup blocks, and we found out that our magic number should be 17.4. Now, there's two ways that we can find our distance from line to line. So we measured our distance, and we came up that we needed a total of 9.83 rotations. Or we can have our block, instead of say 9.83 rotations, we can have it drive exactly 171 centimeters. Either one of these blocks will work. I like to do it both ways depending on the situation. So in this case, we're going to just go ahead and use our 9.83 rotations, and we're going to check to see if our magic number actually works. Boom, first try, kinda. Well, there you go. Now you should be able to get your robot to go any specific distance just by measuring. Next time we're gonna learn how to do some basic turns. I guess I'll see you in the classroom.